Nobody's dying. It blew off his arms and one of his legs. Do you want to see him before he dies? No. Okie exploded. Do you think I want to see him like that? My dad was a chip, and Lyndon B. Johnson played poker with him, as they do today. It wasn't the privileged. It wasn't the Donald Trumps. I'm sorry, but it wasn't. And it wasn't the Joe Bidens. They used student deferments. They used fallen arches, but they didn't go. It's the working class that went. When my dad came back from Vietnam, the fallout of war, it doesn't just impact, it's sad enough that it impacts the soldiers, but it's their families. It's the one downstream. And when Dad came back and then he was drinking whiskey, he would chew a hole in his lip. He was in a terrible place. He talks about that PTSD is transferable. You give it to your family members. Think less of yourself and more of others. Hey, welcome to podcast number 3. 40 poems for 40 years. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I did the number 1 and number 2 podcasts pretty close together. And I've explained in those some of the things I've struggled with. I won't go into that in too much detail on this one. I have a lot to get through, and I have a really competent person helping me with these. I'm 61. I was born in 1964, so I'm largely illiterate when it comes to the internet and the workings of podcasts and how to put things together. And I found a really good person, and I'm always looking for God to guide me, and that's not a cliche, but there was a few things that happened that led me to this person, and I'm really hoping that we have a working relationship and I can keep producing these. But this is... The name of this one is going to be a Memorial Day tribute, and it's going to probably be one of the more difficult ones that I have to do because it involves my father. And anything that involves my father, he passed a few years ago. It's difficult for me because there's a lot of pain there. There's a lot of wounds. If you listen to podcast number 1, it deals with fathers and sons with the poem. Each one of these podcasts will be specifically tailored to the poem. And tonight is Memorial Day tribute. It's about war. It's about World War World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War, and then the Afghanistan War. And my dad, unfortunately, was drafted at the height of Vietnam, and so the portions of that poem that deal with Vietnam, I had that specifically with my dad in mind. The other the first World War II, I'm named after a man. He's my uncle, great uncle, and he was a ranger in World War II. And we both share a middle name, Martin. I knew him. Fortunately, I got to meet him before he died. I was probably 17 the last time that I saw him. But he was living in Bentonia, Mississippi, and after he got out of World War II, he was highly decorated. He had a Purple Heart. And he became the sheriff of Yazoo County, Mississippi. He was also a game warden. Reminded me of my papa, who was kind of my surrogate father, who predominantly was the male lead in my life. Thank God I had him. And he reminded me of him. He was the younger brother, but they looked a lot alike. And so World War II, I got to stand on the beaches of Normandy with my sons in the summer of 2014, and I thought of him. We actually saw where the Rangers came ashore and scaled this wall, and I thought of Uncle Daryl. Daryl Hancock was his name, but the first portion of the poem was inspired by his service, and then Korean War. I have a very good friend named Glenn Matthews, where at this season of my life, he's probably been my go-to friend, ex-military like me. He served in the Persian Gulf War. He was a helicopter crew chief, and we both ended up in the Coast Guard through some twists and turns. I had mentioned I started out in the airborne infantry. Glenn was in the Army. He was a helicopter crew chief with the 160th, which is a pretty high-tech helicopter unit in the Army. They fly a lot of the Special Forces guys. So Glenn and I are very close, and his father was drafted into the Korean War. And I put some lines in there for him. And then I was with a friend in law school whose brother was in the Afghanistan War, and I got to meet his brother. I was in law school at the time, and his brother was there. My brother was there, my friend from law school, and that's how I met his brother. And my friend's name was Kelly Lynn, and his brother was a captain, and he was in Afghanistan. And tragically, when I returned from Germany in 2015, I was working for the JAG Corps there with my youngest son um, as a single dad. And when I came home, Kelly had contacted me, and his brother had committed suicide. So the last portion that deals with Afghanistan, that's kind of the background and the inspiration for the poem. My notes are kind of skewed on this one. I've actually done this podcast before. It went longer. I'm trying to keep these at I'm trying to slow down at around 30 minutes. And that one went over about 41 minutes. And I got a little bit emotional, not in a good way, angry. And I talked about some draft dodgers that are serving in the Senate and how they lied about their military service. And that's not the direction I really wanted to go. And so I'm going to try to do this again. And I've edited some of what was in that previous podcast that I didn't go live with, or I didn't give it to the person that's helping me with these to upload. And hopefully this will go better. This will go smoother and without all the vitriol and the passion, the anger that I still feel at times for those type of people. But I want to start it out. I write poems all the time, and I'm working on a book, and I've mentioned this in podcasts 1 and 2. And I'm hoping that the book of poems, 40 poems for 40 years, I'm hoping that this is kind of the gateway door for this book. I started this in 2013, and it's called Grasping at Normal. And it is somewhat semi-autobiographical. I almost went with the name Partly Truth and Partly Fiction, but Grasping at Normal seems to fit it better because I feel like that I've done that most of my life. And but I'm going to read a portion of that tonight because it goes into the poem, and it goes into just the losses that we've had in combat. And my dad lost some really good friends, but one in particular, and it's in the book. And I'm going to read that portion tonight. So I have that here. I have my notes, but I want to start with a poem. In the book, there is a poem about New Year's Eve, and I wrote that in Germany when I was there with my son. I only got through 4 semesters of law school, and my son's kidneys failed. I was struggling in some other areas, and so I never returned after we went into the hospital with him. I went into the hospital with him. It was just me and Chris, and he went in and out of Children's Hospital in Oklahoma City, and it took him a while to go into remission. And when he went into remission, we went to Germany. And I got stationed when I was 19 years old via the 82nd Airborne in Baumholder, Germany. And it was kind of neat how I got to go back there in 2013 and live 2 years with my son and work for the JAG Corps and work for a wonderful man, Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Keitsa. I have to say more about him in another podcast because I don't have the time. And I wouldn't want to do him a disservice because he's an awesome person. And he was such a blessing to me and my son. But I just want to read that. I actually wrote this one today. And it's on the new year. And since we're on the cusp of the new year, I'm doing this on December the 30th. And so the person that's helping me with these, he's rolling these out the way he thinks will have the higher impact. So I'm sure this one is going to air maybe a couple of weeks past the new year. But I do a lot of walking, kind of hiking. And today this just came to mind. And I always try to do a poem at the end of the new year about the new year coming and the one leaving. And I just call this On the Precipice. Here we stand on the precipice while 25 expires, as all the days we lived till now are consumed in time's bright fires. So don't seek to return again. Take the lessons that you've learned and stop relighting matches at bridges that's been burned. And tomorrow isn't promised, regardless of your wealth, and a minute isn't guaranteed to those in perfect health. For this life is too precarious, and we are not in charge, and our stories stand so very small beside the epic that's writ large. So take some time and contemplate. Tie up your loosest ends, then look to him who gives us breath before 26 begins. Then set your feet firm in the path, fix your eyes a steady gaze, and run the race assigned to you by the Ancient One of Days. I hope that it encourages you going into the new year, to let those bygones be bygones. Look with hope, trust in God's mercy, for it's great. Trust in His grace, and stop trying to relight the matches by those bridges that you've burned. It never ends well. When something ends, it ends for a reason. Quit trying to resuscitate it and move forward. That's just some advice. You can take it or leave it. So moving on to my poem, and to the theme of this podcast, I want to read, kind of to get oriented and kind of my worldview. I mentioned this, I think, in podcast 2. It's been a while. Like I said, I haven't made one in quite some time. And there's some battles that I fight personally, and it makes these difficult kind of to stay on task. But I'm getting much better. Much better. About 11 months ago, I really broke down. I've suffered periodically. There's been about 4 events in my life, and I was diagnosed with PTSD. I think a lot of it stems from childhood. I had some when Dad came back from Vietnam in '69, I was only 5 years old, and there were some tough things that happened. And the nervous system, I've exhaustively read. I've read The Body Keeps the Score by Besser van der Kolk. I'm reading another one now called The Biology of Trauma. I've read Peter Levine. I've tried to understand why I'm this way, why my nervous system has been so volatile. I don't know. But I even flew to Chicago on 3 separate occasions and had these shots in my neck. It's called the dual sympathetic nerve reset. The first 2 were wonderful. And then I went back for a third, and I actually did both sides. And I went into a terrible deep depression at the beginning of this year. I lost like 20 pounds in a very short time. And I'm an active person. I've always been active. I was above average athlete in high school. I played football. I ran track. I was always active. I joined the Airborne Infantry. And even when I went back to Germany in 2013, I ended up quarterbacking our flag football team for the Army JAG office. And I was almost 50. And we did relatively well. So I've always been active. And when that mental part breaks down, man, it's very disturbing. And I've always been able to kind of push through. And this past year, I didn't think I was going to push through. I ended up, about middle part of the year, I went to a thing called Mighty Oaks. There's a sword behind me if my camera's angled right. But it's a 5-day intensive retreat for veterans and first responders. And that helped immensely. I met some really good guys there. And so anyway, but I just wanted to reorient to where I'm at and kind of my worldview. And I want to take it from Acts 17, starting in verse 22. And it says, Paul then stood up at the meeting of the, I hope I'm saying this right, Areopagus, and said, People of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, To an unknown God. So you are ignorant of the very thing you worship, and that is what I am going to proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands, as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else. From one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And he marked out their appointed times in history and the boundaries of their lands. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as some of your own poets have said. We are his offspring. And I love that. I love that. When I was in the infantry, unfortunately, I wasn't the best in land navigation, and that's not something you want to admit. It's like a sailor saying he's not good at navigation. But I think I was just young. I was 19, and it didn't appeal to me really. I didn't understand, I guess, how significant it was, and it's very significant. But anyway, You have to get oriented on the map, on the terrain, and in life we have to get oriented. And for me, that's where it begins. It orients that the times that I'm born into, the families, as bad as it may be for some, and I've certainly had my challenges with my parents, and especially with Vietnam and my dad. But I don't believe in self-made men. I have no use for the self-made man. He's a fool. He's full of his own pride, his own ego. It's a fool's gold, and he's arrogant. And I mean, even if you didn't believe in God, I had I've had some encounters with some men that were really something in their prime, and then I saw that trajectory. And sometimes I'll see a very old man. I won't even know him, but I just see the years accumulation in his life, and he's stooped over, and you see the lines on his face, and he's struggling to walk maybe. And this one refrain comes into my head: the glory of man, the glory of man. It's so passing, and it's so brief, and yet we idolize, we hold up these idols, and they're going to be. I remember my dad was a huge fan of Muhammad Ali, and he didn't like the fact that he didn't go to Vietnam, but he thought he was one of the best fighters he'd ever seen. He said he was more like a middleweight, and I love watching the fights with my dad. We listened in a little yellow Mustang when he came back from Vietnam. I forget what year, but it was a big fight, and it was Ali. I'm not sure which one. I was little, but I remember sitting in that car with my dad. And Dad still called him Cassius Clay. But I saw the trajectory of his life, and I saw at the end, and I don't know, there were some public appearances that if he would have been my family member, I wouldn't have exposed him to the public, because he just didn't. I wouldn't want to be remembered that way. And I thought, if someone as great as Muhammad Ali, and as beautiful, I mean, the guy was just magnificent on so many levels, but to see that deterioration and that drop off, and he's gone. And where is he now? He's gone. And we all have to face that. And so I'm not a humanist. I'm not a big proponent of man. And I do believe that God marks out the seasons. And it said he gives us our very breath. I don't want to belabor this, but I just want you to know. And there's a verse that my mother, I read it at her memorial. She passed in 2023. And then I shortly thereafter moved, and I may have mentioned this in some previous podcasts, but I moved into the sticks of Mississippi. I was in the middle of nowhere. But my mother loved Ecclesiastes, and I actually bought her a picture before I went back to Germany. And I'm sure you've heard it. There was a song made in the 60s, I think, by the Byrds. But it says, "There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather them. A time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to search and a time to give up. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be silent and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace." And I think that God is in the times business. He orchestrates the times. And the fool doesn't see that. I remember in the Bible when Jesus' brothers wanted him to go up to the festival, and he was going to go up, but he wasn't going to go up publicly. And they said, basically, anybody that wants to be a public figure gets out there, like the politicians do today. And Jesus said, "I'm not going." He said, "Any time is your time. Any time is your time. My time has not yet come." His time was orchestrated by his Father. But to a man that's a mercenary, C.S. Lewis said that heaven holds nothing for the man of a mercenary heart. That's probably a poor paraphrase, but if you're a mercenary, all you care about is basically cannibalizing the moment for your own benefit in every way. The water of your life doesn't ever raise above your own self-interest. And But for those that know him, for those that hope is in him, I think that hope itself purifies us. And it's not easy. I think Peter says, if the righteous are barely saved, what will become of the ungodly and the sinner? And so I would encourage you, if you don't believe, consider it. Humble yourself. And there was a song by one of my favorite artists back in the day named Keith Green. And he said, basically, if I can remember it, so many times I've tried to tell you, but I don't think you've been listening. There's nothing no one can try to sell you because his love is free. You try to make things too complicated, but you really don't have to be that smart. But you won't learn a thing until you soften your heart. And I pray that God will soften your heart in the new year, that you would learn, that you would understand that he is the person that sets your boundaries, that he is the person that orchestrates your times, that you're here, and that there is a time for everything. David said that God, give us wisdom to number our days so that we can live wisely. We're not here, guys, very long. Make the most of it. Live in the moment. I hope that those things encourage you. And as I start, sometimes I get off and I'm trying to stay on task. I think this one is going to go over 30 minutes, but it's okay. It's one of the longer poems, and it's one of the more difficult poems for me because it deals with my dad. The last podcast number 2 was on spiritual combat, spiritual war, a warrior's resolve. This one deals specifically with physical combat, which my dad was in. And as I've said, this personally impacted me because of my father. But I wanted to put a quote. When Johnson was running for the presidency, he said, I'm quoting him, we're not about to send American boys 9 or 10,000 miles away from home to do what Asian boys ought to be doing for themselves. But once he was elected, he did exactly that. But it wasn't the elites. It wasn't the privileged. It wasn't the Donald Trumps. I'm sorry, but it wasn't. And it wasn't the Joe Bidens. They used student deferments. They used fallen arches, but they didn't go. It's the working class that went, and it's always that way. I heard an officer say once, they're the type of men that love to play poker with other people's chips. My dad was a chip, and Lyndon B. Johnson played poker with him, as they do today. And it's never. And if it is one of the elite's sons, they're going to put him in a cushioned position in a JAG office somewhere in the rear. And then they're going to try to parlay that into a attorney general's position or maybe even the presidency. And it's a pathetic thing. And I'm going to try not to get as upset as I did in the last one, which made me delete it and go anew. But it really bothers me. And it was the marginalized. My dad was a Chickasaw Indian. He had no stroke. He had no power. And so he went. And the poem will speak to that tonight. There's a quote by George MacDonald, and he was very instrumental in the faith of C.S. Lewis's. If you know, he was an Oxford professor and an atheist. And George MacDonald, I think, was a Scottish preacher. I've read some of MacDonald's work, but this is what he said about politics. It is not in the nature of politics that the best men should be elected. The best men do not want to govern. The best men do not want to govern their fellow men. I love that, and it's true. I don't know if in grade school, you got your school guards, and they love the badge, and they love to be able to direct the kids. They're in charge. They love it. It's intoxicating. It's powerful, and they. I don't know. I think that our politicians, they're corrupt for the most part. And I've said in other podcasts, if a prostitute goes out and she prostitutes herself for money, it's tragic on many, many levels. But you're not surprised. It's like, yeah, she has sex for money. Why are we surprised when politicians lie? I don't get it. I don't understand how obtuse we can be. They lie to our faces. I mean, I'm so appreciative of many things that Donald Trump has done. I am. But he said he was going to have the war stopped in Ukraine before he was inaugurated into office. He said it. If you look, you can find it. Elect me, and before I'm inaugurated, the war will be stopped in Ukraine. He said that. Is it stopped? Lyndon B. Johnson, I'm not going to send American boys. Did he send them? So please, please understand, 99% of what a politician says is lies, if it benefits him. He'll tell the truth if it benefits him too. So I want to move to the poem. And I do want to say one thing. When my dad came back from Vietnam, the fallout of war, it doesn't just impact, it's sad enough that it impacts the soldiers, but it's their families. It's the one downstream. And when Dad came back, he was taking white crosses. I think they'd given them white crosses in Vietnam to keep them awake. And then he was drinking whiskey. He would chew a hole in his lip. He was in a terrible place. He'd been a tunnel rat. He had 2 Bronze Stars. He was in the Tet Offensive. He was in the Battle of Quai Son. Oh, I want to say also, there's a quote by Edgar Allan Poe. And here's what he says about stimulants or things that we're addicted to. I have absolutely no pleasure in the stimulants in which I sometimes so madly indulge. It has not been in the pursuit of pleasure that I have periled life and reputation and reason. It has been the desperate attempt to escape from torturing memories, from a sense of insupportable loneliness and a dread of some strange impending doom. And I'm going to tell you personally, I understand that dread of an impending doom. And I fully believe Dr. Eugene Lipoff, who gave me the shots in Chicago, he talks about that PTSD is transferable. You give it to your family members. And when Dad came back, what was visited on me at such a young age, and on my mother, she was older, but still. And my mother was not this little house on the prairie submissive woman. She was a redheaded hurricane. And she could give it as good as she got it. And those two was such a combustible coming together. And I was in the middle of that combustion. And it wreaked havoc on me. And I understand that. And I saw it in my father. And I just want to read this from the book. And the book it's not G-rated. It's not even PG-rated. There's a lot of language in it, a lot of death. And but this, I'm going to take this up. Previous to this paragraph, my dad is sitting with his squad leader, and they were exchanging stories about their sexual conquest and their, their fights, and they were. My dad was a very self-deprecating person. He could fight. He was a fighter, but he never would try to act like he was anything more than he was. He would readily admit when he got his butt handed to him, and this takes up right after they had been. Exchanging stories, and they were very close because this guy was from a place where my dad was painting water towers before he was drafted. And this is from the book that I'm working on, but it will tie into the poem. It says, stories were exchanged between them, each trying to outstory the other. Plans were made in between stories well into the night until both of their tongues were thick with alcohol and their eyelids closed defiantly over bloodshot eyes irritated by too much smoke. It was settled. Okie would visit Burmeister's family in Illinois, and then Burmeister would visit Okie's in Oklahoma. There's a saying that goes, there's one that sticks closer than a brother, and that couldn't be truer for those that have shared the terrors and challenges of combat, those bonds that last a lifetime severed only in death. Okie's squad was halfway through the village, and it felt like they were walking through a pasture of docile cows. Everyone in the village did their best to ignore them and act like nothing was happening. The light infantry squad moved through as if they were saying, don't mind us, we're just passing through. Burmeister had checked on Alpha Company. Burmeister had checked on Alpha Team and was now shoulder to shoulder with Okie moving with Bravo Team. Suddenly an old woman in black pajamas burst out of a grass hovel carrying a burlap sack draped over his shoulder. She was in a full-out sprint. Burmeister slapped Okie's shoulder. Hey, I bet that bitch has the VC payroll. You go that way, and I'll try to steal her in your direction. Okie took off running in the direction Burmeister pointed out. The cross, Star of David, and tribal talisman flailed wildly at the end of his chain. Suddenly the earth moved beneath his feet like a rolling sea, and it felt like a wave had lifted him high and slammed him violently onto a sandy beach. Oki was face down in the dirt, and his ears filled with a high-pitched screech like a wailing siren. Smoke was everywhere. Well, what the fuck just happened, and where is all that goddamn smoke coming from? Oki's mind was grasping to make sense of the sudden explosion. Villagers scattered like geese off a pond. Oki, you okay? Hey man, you good? It was a member of Bravo team kneeling next to him. What the fuck was that? Oki said, rolling up on his side. And where is all that damn smoke coming from? Sergeant Burmeister stepped on a bouncing Betty, and it set off the smoke grenades on his LCE. Did it kill him? Oki asked in a deadpan voice. No, but he's dying. It blew off his arms and one of his legs. Do you want to see him before he dies? No, Oki exploded. You think I want to see him like that? Oki had recovered and was standing at the edge of the village while a medic looked over him. He could hear the lieutenant standing over by Burmeister's body talking on the radio. We're going to need a medevac ASAP. We have 1 KIA and 1 wounded. A numbness washed over Oki's body. He felt the fatigue that comes not from physical activity, but from a deep loss. The kind that settles deeply in your muscles and lodges in your bones. Later that evening, Oki's platoon had set up camp overlooking a small stream. Their perimeter secured, he was now leaning back against a tree and looking toward the western horizon. A sliver of sun was all that remained of the day, and the moon was quickly taking possession of the night. Oki had never noticed so many colors in a sunset. The deepest of blues mixed with brilliant oranges, angry reds, and timid pinks. He thought of his home on the Oklahoma plains, the sunsets, and the tabletop mountains, which were more like flat hills jutting up from the horizon. He thought of a Bible verse from his youth, I will lift up mine eyes into the hills. He thought of his son and his ex-wife. The sky was blue like his son's eyes, and the angry clouds red like his wife's fiery red hair. He longed for them both. He longed for his friend Burmeister, but most of all, he longed for home. That's from the book that I started in 2013, and I hope to finish it this coming year. But those are stories that my dad told me personally, usually under heavy alcohol intoxication. And war is a terrible thing. And the poem, I hope that it honors these men that, like my father, like my friend's dad, like men that served, like my friend Glenn, who was in the Persian Gulf, like anybody that serves. I never got to experience combat, and I always wanted to. I didn't join the airborne infantry to cook eggs. I wanted to get in the mix because my father was in the mix, and I wanted to see. I wanted to test myself. The closest I came to was Grenada, and I went on levy to Germany, and I missed that for about a month, and it made me sick at my stomach. And but we lost people in training missions. We had a casualty on a parachute jump. It wasn't in my unit. But I saw it on the blotter or whatever they call it. It was on a bulletin board. And when I was in Germany, we had people, we had a guy climb a tower and was riding short timer and fell through and fell to his death. So another person was rolled over by a tank in training exercises. So it's not just combat where we die. And anybody that serves in the military, they're just writing a blank check for the government to cash. And so I have the highest respect, and I'm so thankful. I'm so honored to this day that I served. And I understand, as I'm looking for this page number, I understand the military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us against. I understand the parasites that are in Congress. And but I'm still so grateful that God gave me the mental capacity, the physicality in my youth to serve my country. And I don't regret it, and I would do it again. So it's on page 27. And I didn't follow my notes like I wanted to, and there's some things that I know I missed, but it's okay. My time is getting. I'm already over 30 minutes, and I wanted this to not go too long. Page 27. I feel like I'm a kid. I was raised Southern Baptist, and this was before the praise band, where you basically stand on your feet for 50 minutes and watch about 7 people on the stage jam out with the lights down and some screen. We had the old hymnals, and I like that. I'm getting old, but it was like, stand to your feet and turn to, just as I am, whatever page, and you hear the pages turning and you're trying to find it. And then, there's the organ and the piano, and it was simple. It was a simple time, and I liked it. I missed that. But I found it. I found the page, and it's called Memorial Day Tribute. And I will end with this. Whew. And as we go forward, I think I'm going to get a lot more, I will become calmer and more focused. Like I said, if you watch podcast number 1 and podcast number 2, maybe in this one, you maybe even see the calming effect. I felt a little bit calmer. I get moments. I felt it. If you see me stumbling, if you hear me speed up, it's not good. And I'm trying to mitigate that. When I played high school sports, my coaches always used to say, Greg, you was one of our best players, but we had to use all of our timeouts to calm you down. And it was that hyper activity. One of my friends, unfortunately, got into meth after I graduated, and I came home from the Army once, and we went to this meth house. I was looking for a cousin, and there was 2 guys in there that was really on meth, and they wanted me to take a bump, is what they give him a bump. And my buddy said, give him a bump? He said, this mother effer has been on meth his entire life, because he knew. And it came from that amped up nervous system. I was in hypervigilance, and I didn't even know, I didn't have a vocabulary for it. My body understood it, but my brain didn't. That's why I'm so glad for the book, The Body Keeps the Score, and for other books that have started to delve into what really happens to the nervous system with childhood trauma, with combat, and all that happens. So the poem is called The Memorial Day Tribute, and it's self-explanatory. He was shaking but determined, staring at beaches he had never seen. His face belied his age. He was just past 17. All his life he had before him, youth fresh within his bones, but suddenly he felt older when he heard the wounded's groans. But never did he falter as he stepped into the waves, his fallen brothers all around him, who would rest in foreign graves. It is winter in Korea, it is cold and he's alone, but he thinks about his lady who he'll marry when he gets home. Then suddenly it exploded in a brilliant flashing glow, the dirt mixed with his blood, turning crimson fallen snow. He wasn't well connected, with no politician's graft. He couldn't hide behind deferments, had no way to dodge the draft. So he went when he was beckoned, while the privilege stayed behind, and he fought deep in the jungles as the war ravaged his mind. With just days left in the country, he was on his last patrol. When death demanded payment with his life, he paid the toll. Raised by a single mother, his options very few, so he enlisted in the army to see what he could do. The youngest in his squad, they were family now in arms. While the privileged strolled at college, they patrolled the peasants' farms. Deep in the Korengal Valley, the enemy hit his mark. Fellow warriors now around him, he lay bleeding in the dark. He thought about his mother and the dad he never knew, but he was comforted while dying by his brothers who stayed true. In a time when things come easy and freedom is despised, as the talking heads keep talking, perpetuating lies, step back for just a moment. Take yourself off of display and think about the fallen who aren't with us here today. Their dreams were just as precious, and their lives no less than yours. For freedoms you hold lightly, they spilled their blood on distant shores. So pause for just a moment, stop pursuing only gain, and be grateful for your freedoms so they won't have died in vain. And I hope going into the new year that you will think less of yourself and more of others. I'm making this, and I just heard something at my front door. So I'm going to close this out. I appreciate you watching, and I'm looking forward to doing podcast number 4. And I really hope you have a great new year. I'm going to go check on what that was. It didn't sound good. But anyway, thank you so much for watching.